Agnes Grey is a humble, quiet, very somber governess Cinderella story, and I really enjoyed it. Hello friends, and welcome to my channel. My name is Haley and I am a Christian wife, homeschooling mother of 3, out to redeem my very own literary education, which means I am just reading a ton of classic literature. And for this fall, especially October, I just had to read another Brontë. I've already read Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte and Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, and I have finally picked up my very first Anne Bronte, and that was Agnes Grey. And I really enjoyed this book. I didn't entirely know what to expect going in. It's a pretty short novel at only about 150, a little more pages. But it was really good and powerful in kind of a more reserved and quiet way. Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights, if you have read them, pack a really powerful punch with some pretty serious twists and turns. And Agnes Grey was not really like that. So in Agnes Grey, we are following Agnes Grey as she is kind of writing down in her diary, recounting this season in her life as a governess. She comes from a very humble family. Her father is a clergyman. Her mother actually was a well-to-do woman, but left all of that wealth and status to marry the love of her life, who was a clergyman, so she kind of brought herself down. But she was a very efficient woman, a very loving and faithful woman, faithful to her husband, devoted to educating her children. And then Agnes and her sister Mary are both very quiet, just good, honest girls. They've lived a really humble life, but a really good life. Agnes is kind of seen as the baby of her family, and they all baby her. But as her father is getting ill and they find themselves getting into kind of financial ruin, which some really tragic circumstances, Agnes takes it upon herself to set out and become a governess. She has some really high ideals and expectations going into it, which I really just related to as a homeschool mom. I actually related a lot to the ideas of education and teaching in this book as a homeschooling mother. But Agnes just set the bar really high in her mind of what she wanted to be for these children, what she was going to do, the kind of relationship she was going to have with these children. And then she sets off to find out that reality, of course, never exactly matches up with our ideals. And the first family that Agnes is with, it's just really kind of sad, honestly. These children are terrible. Terrible. They don't listen. They don't mind. They have no desire to do any schoolwork. They want to torment their governess. There is one child who even has a tendency towards being malicious towards animals. Just a really bad scenario. And Agnes is really giving these children her all. She kind of says, with perseverance and diligence and devotion, I'm going to make something of these children with divine assistance. Because of course, Agnes is a clergyman's daughter. So she's also very spiritual and very religious and has high morals and high ideals. She holds herself to a higher standard, and she really thinks that she's going to form and shape these children no matter what. She is trying to maintain an outward appearance of calm and consistency that she knows these children need. But honestly, to just no avail. And there's a quote in here that I tried so hard to find, and I am going to find it because I want to commonplace it. Kind of about, you can really put everything into it, and the children are still going to be unruly and unmanageable. Now, my children may not be quite that bad as this first family that Agnes had to deal with. But as a homeschooling mother, I do find that I set ideals for their education and our routine and the way it's going to go. But children at the end of the day have a will of their own, and we do have to contend with that. But what I loved about Agnes was that she just wanted to be faithful to God's calling for her and to the ideals she set for herself, even when things were just going terribly wrong. Because of course she also had contend with the parents who were very overindulgent to their children, who really didn't even want a great education for their children. The mom just wanted the boys to be just good enough to go to school and the girls to only learn the type of education that would make them flattering to a husband. And of course, Agnes, who was educated by a really great woman, just has different sets of ideals. So she has to work within the framework of these parents who just don't even look at her like she's a human. As a governess, Agnes found herself in this really weird middle ground of where she is too low of a station to become really familiar with the family and the parents, and yet her station is higher than that of the average servant, like the housemaids or the groundskeepers and things like that. So she's just very lonely. And all in all, this first family doesn't work out. She gets fired and then finally finds another position, only to have two young ladies to teach that are basically like the wicked stepsisters from the Cinderella story, and they really treat her as such. In fact, when she finally starts to have this glimpse of potential, maybe hope and happiness, they kind of take that from her and snatch it from her, just like the stepsisters in the Cinderella story. But it all ties together so beautifully in the end. And Agnes as a character, I love and really revere and would love to have her traits, because no matter what turmoil she faces, she just bears her trials incredibly well. Now, she's very human on the inside because, of course, this is from her perspective and it's like she's writing a diary. So you get all of her emotions and thoughts and heartache, and where she just wants to so badly run into a room and just burst into tears. But on the outside, she's just this presence of goodness. She thinks, you know what, I'm just going to keep doing good, and maybe I'll have some influence on these young girls, maybe even their parents. And it was just that outlook about her that was so subtly beautiful. She's not an in-your-face character. She's very plain. She's very, very self-deprecating. She's incredibly hard on herself, incredibly humble. But her morality is just so beautiful. There was a scene in this book with another character, and I won't go into the details of who because I don't want to spoil anything that happens in this story. But this character is a really bad lady. She is just kind of the definition of a coquette, really. But she invites Agnes over to her home and just wants her to be in awe of all this lavish and beauty she has in her home. And Agnes can tell that she's searching for that from her. But there's a moment within Agnes that she kind of says, I'm just going to have a stone cold face. I see that she wants me to be very impressed, but I'm just not going to be. But then she says, you know what? No, that is just my pride talking. The loving and kind thing to do would be to, yes, this is very beautiful. It is lovely, because that might be the only small piece of happiness that other lady or character could get. And it is those decisions and moments and actions like that that just make Agnes this really shining character, even though no one else in the story seems to notice her. And I read this book along with the Literary Life podcast. If you are at all on the road to self-education or building a personal curriculum and you want to do that with classic literature, I cannot recommend that podcast enough. They work through entire novels like Agnes Grey within several podcast episodes, going just a few chapters at a time, and they will give historical context, historical background. So when they did Agnes Grey, they talked a ton about governesses in the Victorian era and education in the Victorian era and what was expected of men and women. They also talked about the Brontes as sisters and some of their background and how Anne Bronte kind of compares to Charlotte and Emily. And it was just fascinating. They had some really great insight on this book that I don't want to go into a ton about because I want to save that for their intellectual property and work. I just encourage you that if you pick up Agnes Grey, you absolutely need to listen to those podcast episodes on the sides to go along with it, because it's really going to enhance your reading experience. I could not wait to finish the next chapters not only because this was just a really beautiful, in a light way, kind of novel, but also because the Literary Life podcast episodes and insights were so good. So I will be sure to link those in the description below if you're looking for them. But this book was just lovely. I loved the ending because it wasn't an extravagant ending. It wasn't this big, necessarily perfect picture of happily ever after. It was very realistic, but wholesome and humble and good and spiritually pure and reverent. I loved a lot of Agnes's thoughts on religious morality, but I will say the Literary Life podcast did point out something interesting. You know, in Wuthering Heights and in Jane Eyre by Emily and Charlotte Bronte, you do kind of get a sense of the supernatural a little bit in those books, but there's really none of that in here. Agnes is very practically a good religious person, but it's not beating you over the head with it. She really believes in her ideals and her morals, but you're not necessarily going to see her pray or necessarily seek for divine intervention, other than when she says, I'm going to use divine assistance to do this and do this well and teaching these children. But you don't really see a lot of supernatural or spiritual elements in that way. But a lot of very practical religious morality that as a Christian, I just loved. I love Jane Eyre's character in Jane Eyre because she's so just morally good, and that is also why I love Agnes Grey. She is not your typical novel heroine where she is bold and in your face and super confident. She has this quiet confidence in her faith, and that just makes her all the more wonderful. And there's a lot more about this book that I want to say, but I don't want you to at all be spoiled about its ending because this book just kept my heart gripping and aching for Agnes. And the ending was pleasantly realistic, but I liked it. So if you have not read anything by Anne Bronte yet, or any of the Bronte sisters, honestly, I would highly recommend starting with Agnes Grey. It's a short Bronte novel, and it's not super intense in the way that the other Bronte novels kind of get. So if you've never read any Bronte, this isn't a bad place to start. It's a very safe place to start. But also, Anne is an author in her own right, and she is not like her sisters in her writing. So I really enjoyed reading this one. I'm actually excited to read The Tenant of Wildfell Hall, which is Anne Bronte's other book. I do also have that one, and I think I am going to read it this year. Not in October, but maybe in November or December, because I enjoyed this one so much. So thank you to Kelley, Bookish Kelley, for giving me Agnes Grey for my birthday, and also The Tenant of Wildfell Hall. This book was on my 40 books I want to read by the age of 40 list. I did a YouTube video on that I'll link in the description below if you're interested. So I was really happy to check this one off, but it wasn't just a check mark. I really, really did enjoy this novel, and I think if you're interested in any of those kinds of topics like education or morality or class systems in the Victorian era or being a governess, this was an incredible novel to read, and I highly, highly recommend it. So the next book I plan on reading is going to be The Legend of Sleepy Hollow by Washington Irving. This is a short story, and this particular edition is a collection of multiple short stories from Washington Irving. Sleepy Hollow is only actually about 28 pages in this. So I'm going to break up my reading a bit by reading The Legend of Sleepy Hollow next. And then after that, I'm going to dive into Dracula by Bram Stoker. I was going to read Vera by Elizabeth von Arnim, and I still am, but I just really want to read Dracula specifically in October. I read Frankenstein last October, and so now I want to read Dracula because it just feels like the time. And the Literary Life podcast has episodes on Dracula that they are currently re-airing right now. And they mentioned this a couple of times when they were doing the Agnes Grey episodes, and I thought, okay, well, you sold me. I had so much fun reading Agnes Grey with their podcast that I want to read Dracula with their podcast as well. So this is going to be my next read. It's a little bit longer. So I'm not entirely sure if I'm going to get through this one in October, but I am going to try. And then I'm going to pick up Vera by Elizabeth von Arnim. And by golly, I might just pick up The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne Bronte after that, because I really enjoyed Agnes Grey. So if you have read Agnes Grey, please let me know in the comments below what you thought about it, or if you plan on reading it, or just what your favorite Bronte novel is. I think my favorite novel is still Jane Eyre, but I loved Wuthering Heights after reading it twice last year. And I also love Agnes Grey. So I'm definitely a Bronte gal. And then if you've read any of these other books I've mentioned, please let me know what you think, because I'm excited about it. And I love when other people are excited about it as well. So that is all I have for y'all. I hope y'all are having a great autumnal, fall, October reading. And Lord willing, I will see y'all next time. Happy reading, friends.